young girl took over her sick mother's job cooking at a ranch. The lonely rancher gave her one chance and suddenly falls for her. Brant Ranch, Wyoming Territory. Early morning, spring thaw of 1877. Snow is melting and dust covers the weathered wood of the farmhouse. Soon Avery guided her mare through the muddy ruts leading to the ranch gate. Her breath drifted in the crisp air, misting, before she reached the rough-hewn steps that led to the kitchen door. She dismounted, reins in hand, and lifted one boot to knock firmly on the splintered wood. The rancher's kitchen was known for being quiet, both in sound and sentiment, and she swallowed her fear before knocking again. The door swung open, revealing Cole Brant, tall, lean, graying at the temples, eyes guarded. He looked at her with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. "Who are you?" he asked without preamble. June squared her shoulders and met his gaze head-on. "I'm taking over breakfast for my mother," she said clearly. "She is sick and needs rest. If you'll let me try, I'll cook for you this morning." Cole raised an eyebrow, his jaw clenched. The barn hands had warned him a replacement cook was coming. No one knew who she was or what mess she might make, but he did not like surprises. He sized her up. 19 years old. Grief in her eyes, but determination carved into her jaw. He nodded once. "One day." June Unk's face relaxed into a small smile. "Thank you, sir. I will not disappoint." She stepped inside. Cole nudged the door shut, and silence settled between them. The kitchen smelled faintly of stale grease and old logs burned cold. June set down her satchel of ingredients, fresh eggs, wild onion, dried herbs, then rolled up her sleeves and set to work. Every task was precise, cracking eggs with even taps, whisking without spilling, folding herbs into stewing meat. The kitchen came alive with motion and purpose. Cole stood in the doorway, arms crossed, silence heavy, as he watched June Unk's hands, quick and sure. He had not expected competence. He had expected chaos. His jaw tightened as the stew bubbled and the skillet sizzled. He even leaned closer, unconsciously, nudging the door open. June paused, glanced toward him, then turned back to the stove. She ladled meat and gravy into a cast iron pot, and set it carefully on the table. She whisked the eggs into a pan, steam rising like memory. She placed a single slice of bread beside each serving plate. It was simple, honest food, rustic but filled with flavor. The aroma drifted through the kitchen and into the adjacent dining area where Cole stood, unmoving. He stepped forward and picked up the ladle, a single spoonful of stew. The warmth fogged his gaze. He brought the spoon to his lips and paused, then ate. The stew was rich, savory, with herbs he did not recognize but responded to in his chest with something unexpected. Comfort. He looked at June. She stood straight by the stove, heart pounding, but her face calm. He did not speak. He turned and trudged outward, then paused, then walked back into the kitchen and set down a pitcher of milk with a quiet clink. June caught her breath. Cole's eyes met hers once, lingered. Then he returned to the door without another word. June began plating eggs and toast as the ranch hands filed in. They took their seats, cast doubtful glances, but tasted the food. Soon only spoons and forks moved. Quiet fell over the long table except for the occasional soft murmur. "Good, simple, thank you." Envy followed them from several high windows. By the time they finished, every plate was clean. June silently cleared them from the table and began washing dishes. Cole lingered nearby. He said, "That was good." June paused her hand in soapy water and looked up. "Thank you, sir." He nodded and walked away, but paused at the door and looked back once more. "Tomorrow," he said. June swallowed, though she had not eaten herself. "Yes, sir, tomorrow." Cole nodded again and stepped outside. The door closed and June exhaled deeply, washing her hands with purpose. Cole had been ready to dismiss her, ready to upset the stew pot in disdain. But the scent arrested him. The taste surprised him, and for the first time since his wife died, someone had earned more than a passing nod in his kitchen. That same morning, shortly after sunrise, June stepped from behind the counter, heart pounding as she watched ranch hands eye the breakfast she had laid out. Golden cornbread muffins, crisp bacon, and scrambled eggs with wild herbs. The long rough-hewn table was filled with skeptical faces. Word about the new cook had spread fast, and expectations were low. Corn muffins? A cowboy sneered, slicing one open. Bet it's dry as Kansas. He took a bite. Heads turned. His eyebrows shot up. He swallowed, relaxed, and took another. A quiet murmur followed. Not bad. A burly ranch hand dipped his fork into the eggs. Herbs from the garden? He asked, surprised. June nodded and wiped her hands. The men ate respectfully, breaking the silence, only to say, real good and tastes like home. June exhaled slowly and began clearing the table, filling pitchers with water and milk, wiping crumbs into a bowl. She avoided glancing at Cole, who sat at the head of the table. He never ate breakfast with them, but she felt his gaze as she worked. Once the last plate was cleared and the table wiped, June turned. She expected nods, maybe a polite word. Instead, she found Cole standing by the table, staring at the crumbs. He nodded. Once, turned and left without a word, leaving silence behind. June blinked, searching his face. He didn't return. She washed dishes in focused silence, turning mugs upside down, wiping the stove, folding cloths. Each movement spoke of respect for her craft and respect for those who used it. Outside, morning light shifted through drifting clouds. Ranch hands trickled out, heading to chores. June lingered at the sink, listening to empty kitchen echoes. Then she saw it on the step by the door, a bottle of fresh milk. Dawn dew glistened on its glass surface. No note, no flourish, just milk. Her breath caught as she lifted it, cold and kind. She read the label. It came from the ranch herd. It had been years since she tasted milk so fresh. June stood quietly, hand resting on the bottle, then whispered, "Thank you, sir." She gently placed it on the counter, then returned to her work, her heart lighter. The day continued without fuss. June prepared a hearty midday lunch, seasoned beef stew, baked beans, and crusty bread. As evening fell, she baked pumpkin pie using squash from her mother's cellar. Her kitchen filled with sweet cinnamon and butter. The ranch hands ate in appreciative silence. At the end of dinner, June swiftly cleared the table, stacked and washed plates with practiced care. As she finished folding cloths, Cole appeared in the doorway. She froze, a plate dripping suds from her hand. He watched for a long moment before speaking in a low, even voice. "That was fine cooking today." June Unk's wrist stilled midair. She met his gaze. "Thank you," she replied softly. Cole nodded once, turned and left without looking back. June watched him go, heart pounding. She sat down the towel, folded her hands. In that quiet kitchen, she felt something shift. Confidence, relief, or perhaps hope. No fireworks, no grand declarations, just milk on a doorstep, a quiet word of praise, and a kitchen held together with care. But sometimes the quietest approvals leave the deepest marks. Brant Ranch kitchen and barn. Early morning about 1 week after June's arrival. June woke before dawn. Pale light seeping through the window. She dressed swiftly in the cold, gathering needle and scrap cloth. Outside patches of snow lingered in the shade. She slipped through the kitchen door and stitched a neat knot in the torn corner of the curtain. Each careful pass of the needle closing the tear. The curtain fluttered quietly as she stepped back. Next, she moved to the hitching post. Horses huffed in the cold air, steam drifting from their nostrils. June used a barn fork to sweep snow from the troughs and clear the path so they could drink. It was quiet, humble work, but it did not go unnoticed. Cole appeared in the doorway, coffee in hand. He paused, put down his mug, touched the fork's handle, then walked away without a word. June returned to the kitchen and began preparing blueberry pie. She mixed flour, wild berries she'd picked earlier, sugar, eggs, and fresh milk from the bottle Cole had brought. She added a dash of cinnamon, careful to keep the crust flaky. As the dough rose, she cleaned every counter and stock in rhythmic motion. At 7:15, ranch hands filed in for breakfast. Cole lingered in the doorway longer than usual, relaxed as he leaned against the frame. The smell of warm pie filled the kitchen. June pulled the pie pan from the oven and placed it on the table, cutting generous slices and serving them with mugs of coffee. The men murmured in surprise and delight. Cole looked at June, seeing not just the pie, but her care in making it unasked for. He realized she had come not merely to cook, but to nurture. After breakfast, June headed out to the barn to stack firewood. 2 cords of split hardwood waited. Instead of reaching for them all, Cole appeared and lifted heavy logs onto the rack while she carried smaller pieces. Their shared labor made no noise, just the sound of boots on straw and logs settling in place. June smiled. Cole nodded once, and they continued in companionable silence. Later, Cole found June washing dishes. The screen door hinge squeaked. Without a word, he tightened the screw, tested the swing. It closed with a soft click. He removed his gloves, set them on the counter, and left the kitchen. That evening, June prepared vegetable stew with tender beef simmering slowly. She added spoonfuls of berry compost on the sliced bread, making open-faced berry toast garnished with mint from a pot by the window. Just as she was slicing bread, the knife slipped and nicked her palm. She gasped, dropped the loaf, and pressed her hand to her heart as blood welled. The room went still. Cole was at her side instantly. He pressed a cloth over the cut, running his fingers gently under cold water. June's breath caught. Only the crackle from the hearth filled the room. He wrapped fresh linen around her palm, fingers deft, but trembling, not out of shock, but something tender. As he tied a tight knot, his eyes met hers. She nodded silently, voice soft. "Thank you, sir." Cole pressed a finger under her wrist to check her pulse. "Good," he said softly. "You eat with them tonight. I'll tend the stew." June swallowed, warmth blooming in her chest. At dusk, she took a seat at the table, cloth still wrapped around her palm, and ate with the ranch hands. Cole arrived with bowls of stew, placing one in front of her and holding her gaze. She offered a small smile. When she finished, she reached for her bowl. Cole took it from her, walked her to the counter, filled it with water, and washed it. Their hands brushed as the bowl passed between them. June's heart fluttered. Cole paused, then looked into her eyes and nodded, a wordless acknowledgement that something had shifted. Twilight settled. June cleared more dishes while Cole lingered in the doorway. He stepped forward, picked up the milk bottle, refilled her pitcher, and set it next to her elbow. Their fingers brushed again. June felt a warmth surpassing the hearth's glow. Cole lifted his cap, scratched at his stubble, and surveyed the kitchen, neatly stacked firewood, the patched curtain, the washed dishes, and June's quiet composure. He nodded, turned, and stepped into the dusk. June exhaled, rinsing her hands in clean water. She sensed that unspoken things, quiet acts of care, were building something fragile but strong between them, gestures that spoke louder than words. A cold winter evening just after dusk. June slid the pan from the wood-fired oven, careful not to tilt the golden-crusted pie she had baked for the ranch. Snow pressed against the window panes and flickers from the hearth light her rosy cheeks. She placed the pie on a low table by the fire, then pulled up a sturdy wooden chair and sat a few feet away, tending the embers' glow. Moments later, Cole stepped in silently. He carried nothing. He sat on a rough bench by the hearth, not at the table, but close enough. Smoke curled above him as he exhaled, watching June with a steady calm. She resisted glancing at him at first, then felt the quiet curiosity of his gaze pulling her attention softly his way. She cleared her throat. "My mother used to make this every winter. She said it would warm hearts when the frost had worn everyone down." She watched him. Cole nodded. "I grew up in Nebraska. We had a small pantry, but Mother always found room for pie." He did not respond. Not immediately. He shifted, his boots scrunching on the hearthstones. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. Someone else baked pies like this once. June paused. The hearth crackled. Who? She asked gently. He sighed. A woman I lost. She used to press a grain of wheat into the top crust. Said it was for good fortune. He sounded distant, as if seeing something behind her. June Unk's fingers stilled. She lifted a fork full of pie to her mouth. The taste was sweet and warm. She folded her hands. I did not know. He said nothing more. They ate in companionable quiet, the warmth slow and steady around them. When the last bite was gone, June offered tea. Cole nodded, then lingered with his mug at the sink. She washed their cups, hands braced on the edge. After she put them down, she noticed it. By the hearth, tucked under a stone, a small shard of wood, intricate, carved with the pattern of a wheat ear. Her eyes flew to Cole, who stood with his back to her, quiet as the falling snow outside. She understood without words. That symbol, grain of wheat, was exactly what he had described, and it lay in his handcrafted touch. Tears pricked as her breathing caught. She knelt by the hearth and touched it, rough and smooth under her fingers, willingly placed, not lost. Cole swallowed, voice soft. It's for protection, for this house, for whoever makes it warm. He did not meet her eyes. Her heart hammered. Thank you, she whispered. It is, she paused, astonished by how the gift felt more personal than words. He closed his eyes, a single breath. June rose slowly, moving toward him across the glowing hearthstones. She laid a hand gently on his arm. It means more than you know. He looked down at her hand, then at the carved wood. His voice was rough. It needed a place. They stood that way, the fire crackling as if in applause. No grand declaration, just warmth spread from pie to symbols to hands held together in the quiet circle of the hearth. June realized that the wheat carving was the symbol from Cole's wedding pie. His unspoken token of acceptance and memory. As she held it, Cole's fingers trembled, an unspoken admission of the past shared, and the present being shaped between them. A week later, late afternoon, mild autumn day, June stood by the stove, stirring a simmering pot of stew for supper. The ranch was quieter than usual. Her mother's letter lay open in her apron pocket, its final words weighing heavy in her mind. My fever's back. I need you home soon. She had delivered breakfast with a polite smile and worked the day as usual, but every chop of vegetables, every ladle of broth felt tinged with farewell. She cleared a spoonful for Cole as he entered the kitchen. He stood at the door and watched her without stepping closer. Mother is worse, she said softly, placing the bowl in front of him. He glanced down and nodded, troubled. After this week, then, he asked, voice steady, but his eyes bared the question she had not wanted to ask. June bit her lower lip. Yes, sir. I must go home to help her get well. She cannot cook for the ranch alone. He did not reply. He lifted the bowl and drank the stew, eyes distant. A foreman walked in. Cole nodded to him. June retreated to the counter, clearing plates with mechanical motions. Over dinner, word spread quietly. June was leaving. The ranch hands ate in subdued tones. They had come to appreciate her food and presence. No one joked tonight. Even the firelight seemed softer. June's heart thudded as she plated the final dish. After supper, she tucked the letter into her apron and taped her hands beneath the rim of the pot as she washed dishes, doing her best to keep her voice even. Cole came in quietly. He stood at the door watching her work. She felt the weight of his gaze and straightened. I will leave Friday dawn, she said. Her voice cracked. He did not flinch. There are people who come through, warm a place, and pass on. I am used to that. He turned slowly, walked to the door, his silhouette dark against the flickering lamplight. Make your trip well. June paused, dishcloth in hand, her vision blurred. She nodded. He didn't look back as he left the room. She continued washing, tears warm on cold cheeks. That night, sleep eluded her. She lay on her cot in the guest room above the kitchen, listening to the wind swirl around the ranch. She wondered if she had only been another guest. Another warm moment soon extinguished. Morning light found her quietly sweeping leaves from the porch. Her saddlebags waited by the door before she made the first trip to the barn. She carried logs for the morning fire, stoking the hearth, wrapping the kitchen in gentle heat one last time. He stacked the last logs midday, paused at the open door. She looked across the expanse of Brant Ranch, corners she had cleaned, herbs she'd planted at the window, a warm feeling she hoped might stay. She carried a bucket into the barn to freshen water for the horses. When she returned, a stack of wet, freshly split firewood stood by the hearth, ready. The kitchen smelled of pine and coals. She paused, absorbing the sight. At midday, Cole appeared at the door. His jacket was dusted from the barn, and his face spare of dust and troubled thoughts. He said nothing. He did not move. He just stood and looked. June lowered her eyes. She expected him to turn away. Instead, he spoke. Voice quiet. I worked last night. She looked up. What? Before midnight. He closed his eyes. I believed everything would be fine. But the porch, the leaky roof. I do not want you to leave in the rain. June stepped closer. The spent tears on her cheeks were gone, but her voice trembled. You did that for me? He gently nodded. His gaze flickered, then fixed on her. For what you planted here. She realized then Cole had labored through the night so her memory of this place would remain warm, dry, safe, not for his convenience, but for hers. They stood there for a moment. Snow or rain once threatened this porch, and she had threatened to leave. He had fought back without force, without words, by rebuilding what she would carry in her heart. June reached out, placing her hand over his, her voice held firm. Thank you. Cole swallowed. Stay as long as you can. Her voice caught. But mother, he nodded, eyes soft. Family is family. But you do not have to go hungry to care for her. They remained holding hands as autumn wind rattled the door. They both knew she would go, but he had given her a reason to stay a little longer. And in that promise, something deeper began to grow. Early morning, the day after June's departure, Cole Brant sat at the long empty table that had once been warmed by June's laughter and steady presence. Dawn light struggled through grimy windows, painting dust in the air. He pushed a plate of overcooked ham and dry biscuits across the table, hunger mingling with an unfamiliar ache, the food tastes of routine now, stale, unsatisfied, hollow. He swallowed mechanically, each bite reminding him of what had filled their days. June had left before dawn, and silence now echoed in her absence. The ranch hands flayed through eggs and sausage without noticing his still distant posture. Cole stood abruptly and walked to the counter. He pulled open the drawer where June's satchel had been. Inside lay a folded scrap of paper, his name marked it. Cole, he hesitated. It was June's handwriting, tidy with a charm, all her own. Unfolding it, he recognized the script immediately. A plum pie recipe, annotated with a few smudged notes in the margin. Beneath it, she'd added a few lines in delicate cursive. Thank you for letting me care for your kitchen, and maybe for letting me care for your heart just a little. Cole traced each word with a trembling finger, his chest tightened. He read the lines again, part through his lips, part in his mind, until he had memorized each phrase. He closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against the countertop. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. He could almost hear her stirring early, opening that same drawer to check the recipe before baking. He sat back down at the table, unfolding and rereading the note until his fingers clasped the paper with such force that the edges creased. Tears welled in his eyes, warm, unbidden. For the first time since his wife's death, he allowed himself to feel the pain she had eased, the warmth she had brought not just into the kitchen, but into his life. He pressed the note flat on the table, smoothing it out again and again. Wrinkling it tears his hands. The ranch hands left the table quietly as they finished breakfast, but Cole remained unmoving, lost inside those few lines. Finally, he folded the paper back up and placed it gently in his pocket. He rose, steadying himself against the wooden table that had witnessed breaths of possibility. He headed toward the barn, dawn light guiding him. He saddled a horse in near silence, the note pressing against his thigh. As he led the horse out of the stable, his eyes glistened, but there was determination in their depth. That evening at sunset, he sat in the kitchen again. This time, he pulled out June's recipe and baked the plum pie himself, following each instruction with care, his hands guided by memory and longing. When the crust browned and the berries glistened under a dusting of sugar, he caught a generous slice and sat down to taste. His lips closing slowly around the sweetness. He closed his eyes at that first bite, cherished, warm, and full of June, and in that taste he carried the memory of her caring presence, and the possibility of what might grow from both their hearts. In that quiet kitchen with the lingering taste of pie and love, Cole realized he could still feed something true, and he would wait until she came back, or until he had found the courage to invite her home again. June's hometown, now with a small Airy. A few weeks after June's departure, early afternoon, Cole Brandt guided his mount down the dusty main street of the small town, a modest cluster of shops, stables, and the newly opened Airy fronted with a painted sign, Avery's Table. He dismounted and latched the res, his fingers lingering on the leather strap. He carried a pie dish wrapped in cloth, the familiar shape warming his heart more than the spring sun. He paused before the door, taking in the sight. June's mother, sturdy and smiling, placing chairs outside the Airy. Warmth radiated through the open window. Cole took a breath and stepped forward. The bell above the door jingled softly as he entered. His eyes adjusted to the glow of the wood stove, the aroma of spices, and the sight of June behind the counter, her hair pinned back, hands lined with honest work. She looked up as he entered and froze. The world still. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said quietly, voice rough. He set the pie down gently on the counter. June's mother turned and stilled, recognition dawning. "Oh my," she whispered. She stood and hugged him without hesitation. "Thank you for bringing this, Mr. Brandt." She smelled of fresh laundry and comfort, like home itself. June stepped forward, still silent, eyes locked on Cole. His pulse thudded as he looked at her again, stronger this time. He remembered the young cook who had warmed a rancher's kitchen. Now she stood in her own kitchen, stronger and more certain. "Mr. Brandt," she began, voice steady. "You did not have to." She paused, the words caught between appreciation and something more. Cole lifted his hand toward her face, but stopped halfway. He cleared his throat. "June, I wanted to thank you." He gestured at the dish. "Your plum pie. It's the first thing my kitchen smelled like." Warmth in weeks, he swallowed. I thought your mother might like it." June's eyes softened. She glanced at her mother, who nodded, encouragement. Then she looked back at Cole. He stepped closer. I don't know if your kitchen has room for an old rancher. I do know I'm tired of cold stoves and empty hearths." He paused, searching June's face. If there is space, I've already brought wood." He eased the pie forward. "And I can stay." The hush held. June Unk's breath hitched. Her mother cleared her throat and took a cup from the counter. "Well, you two talk. Coffee's hot." June laid her hand on the pie, then reached forward and gently brushed it against Cole's. She said softly, "There is always room for wood in for you." Cole exhaled the weight he'd carried. A genuine smile broke across his face. He brushed dust from his coat. "Thank you." June pulled open a chair for him and poured the coffee. Cole sat, hands steady for the first time in weeks. They ate together. Pie still warm, coffee in cast iron mugs, the small area filled with the scent of heart and hearth. Cole watched June serve a plate to her mother and then hang coats by the door. He looked back at her. She was home and he was ready to build a place here. He lifted his mug to warmth. He toasted quietly. June smiled as she lifted hers to being home. They drank. The old hurt faded like smoke on a spring breeze. A new warmth grew between them, built on kindness, curiosity, and that first plum pie recipe. It was not a grand declaration. It was a beginning. Cole folded the note from the recipe in his pocket. He had brought more than wood. He had brought himself, and he would stay. And on that bright afternoon in June's Airy, two hearts chose to warm each other at the stove of life. Avery Stable stood on the same dusty street where June had grown up. It was late spring, exactly 1 year since she opened the Airy. In that time, the humble roadside shack had blossomed into a beloved community spot. A hand-carved golden ear of wheat crowned the wooden sign above the door, a symbol of warmth, harvest, and hope that June and Cole had designed together. Mid-morning light streamed through clean windows, illuminating tables and drifting mows. June stood before the hearth, pulling freshly baked cornbread from a cast-iron skillet. The warm scent mingled with laughter of customers, finishing biscuits and sipping coffee. Cole leaned over a tabletop, polishing it attentively. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms, hands once accustomed to splitting firewood and mending fences, now refining dining tables with care. June paused and watched him for a moment, smiling quietly as he moved naturally in the space. Outside, June Unk's mother sat on the porch swing, knitting softly, her shawl draped over her shoulders, gray curls tasseled by the breeze. She glanced between her daughter and daughter-in-law, her heart swelling at seeing this rancher settled in her home. By late morning, the lunch crowd had arrived. Locals, traveling wagon hands, families curious to taste June's cooking. Plates emerged with savory stew, fresh baked bread, green beans from June's garden, and cherry cobbler topped with cream. Conversations rose in contented murmurs. People didn't just come for food, they came for community nurtured by good meals and genuine care. At the back, a chalkboard announced June's heirloom cornbread and Cole's ranch house bliss stew. The hand-lettered special reflected their partnership, her cooking, his hospitality, their shared story. June carried a steaming tray into the dining room. Cole stood as she approached, nodding as he polished a table. "That smells wonderful," he said softly. Pleased. June placed the tray on a nearby table. "Thanks for helping," she replied quietly as he stepped forward to inspect the bowls and plates. Just then, a little girl from the neighboring farm peeked inside and pointed. June knelt, offering her a cornbread muffin. The child's eyes lit up. June slid the muffin across the counter to Cole. He knelt, too. The girl smiled and ran off, clutching her treat. June rose, brushing flour from her hands, and returned to the counter where Cole polished a lamp. She placed a hand gently on his shoulder and whispered, "The hearth is warm today." Cole glanced up. "Might be the wood," he replied, gazing at her. Their eyes met, and time seemed to pause. "You are the wood," June said, pressing her fingers on his shoulder. He closed his eyes for a moment, then reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you for keeping this place burning," he said. At that moment, June Unk's mother entered with a freshly knitted scarf. "For Cole," she said, draping it around his neck. "Homecoming warmth."